So, as you all know, laser is just an acronym. It is an acronym for the word light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. So, how this works and how it is useful for us, a few basic points in physics will help us understand. So, usually there are few substances which have the property to laze. Laze means they'll absorb energy in one particular form and emit another form of light energy. This another form of light energy is more useful. Here you can see the entire light spectrum contains all the colors. From here you can take out a focus single color which can be focused on the any part of the eye where you would like to focus. So this is how the laser works. If you go to the molecular anatomy and all, you know that each atom, it has a proton and a neutron in the center, and the electrons are rotating in a orbits. So when an electron from a higher orbit is descending into a lower orbit, it releases some amount of energy that is called as photon. This photon of energy is the stimulated emission which we can use to direct according to our needs. So the stimulated emission is very important for us to make use of this. So there are a few basic differences between laser and light. Laser is a stimulated emission. As you have seen previously, whenever there is a change of the orbit of the electron, there will be some amount of light liberated, or the photon will be liberated by stimulation. So it is a stimulated emission, whereas light is a spontaneous emission. Laser is monochromatic, whereas light is polychromatic. It has multiple colors. Always your laser light will be of a particular frequency and a single color. Laser light is highly energized, and that energy can be directed according to the requirement, whereas the light, general light, will not have any energy. It's a poorly energized state. Laser lights are properly focused because they are parallel rays and they have a property of coherence. Whereas our usual visible light, what we see, it's a divergent rays, so it cannot be sharply focused. It keeps diverging and the rays are not coherent. Now, if you look at the wavelengths of light, there is a visible spectrum. Anything below the visible spectrum is the ultraviolet rays, and above the visible spectrum is the infrared rays. There are few laser rays which are useful in the ultraviolet range, that is argon fluoride. This is useful in excimer lasers. But most of the lasers which we use in the eye are in the visible range. Most common ones are like the argon green, which is in 514 range, and you have ND-YAG lasers, which is in the 532 range. Few lasers which are above the visible spectrum, that is in the infrared. Here you can see the visible light ranges from 400 nanometers to 750 nanometers. So UV light is anything of frequency less than 400 nanometers. For us in all this, argon fluoride is one thing. If you can remember while writing an answer, it will be very helpful, because this is the excimer laser. Excimer laser is basically used in photoablation. We'll see what are the properties of the laser lights. Now, in the visible spectrum, as I said, argon laser is very important. Most commonly used laser for photocoagulation is argon green laser in the range of 514 nanometers. In the infrared, you have ND-YAG laser. ND-YAG laser frequency is 1064. When the frequency is doubled, then it becomes half of it, that is 532 nanometers. Double frequency ND-YAG laser again can be used in photocoagulation, whereas basic ND-YAG laser will be used in photodisruption. We'll see what are these terms. So whenever the laser is interacting with the tissues, there will be some amount of changes. Such changes can be either thermal, or it can be photochemical, or it can be ionizing. Thermal changes that you see could be in the form of photocoagulation, photodisruption, or photovaporization, whereas chemical change is in the form of photoablation. We'll just see all these. Photocoagulation. In case of photocoagulation, what happens is the laser light, whenever it is focused on the target tissue, it generates heat. Due to the effect of this heat generated, there will be denaturation of the proteins which are present in the epithelial cells or the stroma. Wherever you're focusing, there will be denaturation of the proteins. This is called as coagulation. So whenever there is a rise in temperature of about 10 to 20 degrees, this is the basic mechanism. Anywhere in the tissue, it will cause coagulation of that particular tissue. So this physics is used in photocoagulation while performing retinal lasers or retinal photocoagulation. So we'll see this again. Basically, you use a lens to focus onto the retina, and this light in the range of visible spectrum is used to photocoagulate by increasing the temperature of the tissue by 10 to 20 degrees. Now, the laser light can act either by photocoagulation. Another thing we said was photodisruption. Basic mechanism in photodisruption is because of the presence of the laser light, there'll be optical breakdown. So because of the optical breakdown of the light, there'll be miniature lightning, like a series of reactions which will cause a thunderclap. Ultimate end of this photo disruption will be there will be multiple acoustic shock waves will be sent into the tissues. Because of these migrating acoustic shock waves, what will happen is there will be lysis or there will be dissection in the tissues. So this, how it acts, we'll see again. This is one example of photo disruption. Here, you're using a YAG laser and you're using it on the posterior capsular opacification. This is after cataract. When you see once the cataract surgery is done, secondary proliferation of the lens epithelial cells will give rise to a posterior capsular opacity. For that, we do not go ahead and do a cataract surgery again. So we can just disrupt that particular membrane of posterior capsular cells by using a YAG laser called as YAG laser capsulotomy. Now, there is another property of laser which helps us, that is called as photoablation. Basically, in ablation, what happens is the chemical bonds that are present within the tissue, they are broken. Example of ablation will be argon fluoride excimer laser as you use in PRK. PRK is photorefractive keratectomy. So what we have observed is usually the light which is present in the visible wavelength, like the argon laser, that is used for photocoagulation. The light which is in the UV. So we were talking about the lasers and their different frequencies. Now, after seeing about the different types of lasers, we'll look at the delivery systems. How you can deliver the laser. You can deliver it through the pupillary area, then you call it as transpupillary. In that, you can use two modalities. Either you can use your slit lamp. It can be slit lamp associated or slit lamp assisted laser. Or you can use indirect ophthalmoscope, which is called as LIO, that is laser indirect ophthalmoscope, which is used to give the laser. Some in other types of laser, transcleral approach is also possible, which might be by contacting or touching the sclera, or a non-contact method can be used. Endophotocoagulation is when you're giving the laser from within the eye. That is when you're operating inside the eye after you have done your pars plana vitrectomy. At the end of the procedure, if you want to give a laser, so from within the eye, you are giving a laser, then you call it as endophotocoagulation. So these are three modes of deliveries of laser. One is transpupillary, one is transcleral, and another one is endophotocoagulation. Now, so we'll just see what are the uses of this property of photocoagulation, where all can it be used in the eye. So if you're able to mention these in your answer, it will be a very good answer. So in the eyelid, supposing a patient has a hemangioma, a capillary hemangioma, which is very conspicuous, and it is a big one which is interrupting his visual field, or it is coming into the optical zone because of its weight over the lid, that is a hemangioma, then a laser photocoagulation of the hemangioma can be done. In case of cornea, when the patient has Astigmatism after a surgery wherein the sutures are applied, using the laser, the sutures can be lysed. You need not go and dissect the sutures, make the patient sit on the machine, and using the laser light, suturotomy can be done for improving the astigmatism. In case of glaucoma, we are all well aware of this. Laser iridotomy is done wherein peripheral laser iridotomy, with the help of this laser, you focus the light. YAG laser is used here, and it is a small hole is created in the peripheral iris to facilitate the flow of the aqueous from posterior chamber into the anterior chamber. The drainage is made easily acceptable here. Now, argon laser trabeculoplasty is a procedure wherein trabecular meshwork is altered by application of laser. Here, wherein the trabecular meshwork is not allowing a good flow of the aqueous outside, a few blanching spots are given on the trabecular meshwork. This is called as argon laser trabeculoplasty. Here also laser is used. Now we have a procedure called as cyclophotocoagulation. This is done as an end procedure when the patient has an absolute glaucoma and then you want to damage the ciliary body, then it is called as cyclophotocoagulation. Now, in case of iris lesions, how photocoagulation is helpful is you can do a sphincterotomy. When you want to see through the iris, which is a very small miotic iris, you want to increase the size, you can focus the laser at the margins of the iris and create a sphincterotomy. This particular procedure called as choretoplasty means alteration of the chorea is pupil, alteration plasty is changing or modifying. So change of the pupillary shape can be done with the help of the laser. Supposing if the patient has an updrawn pupil, if you give laser to the inferior part of the iris, then that shrinks, bringing back the updrawn pupil down. So this is how it is helpful. Out of all these, the most important is the retinal laser. All of you should know about retinal lasers. We will see a little bit detail. For you to remember, PRPC is panretinal photocoagulation, which is used in case of indications like diabetic retinopathy and central retinal veil occlusion. We'll just see how diabetic retinopathy and lasers are connected. So broadly classifying diabetic retinopathy, we have non-proliferative and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. In case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you see all new vessels. Now normally this is the disc and here is a macula. In case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you are seeing here multiple vessels that are growing. These are all small, multiple new vessels which are growing over the disc. If such vessels developing anywhere else other than the disc, then you call it as NVE. NVE is neovascularization elsewhere. So either of these presents along with some amount of vitreous hemorrhage, or at least 1/3 of the disc is involved with new vessels, or more than half of the disc area is involved with new vessels in the area elsewhere, then these are the indications for retinal laser. So in case of diabetic retinopathy, proliferative diabetic retinopathy is a definite indication, which is a high-risk PDR is definite indication. You can also go for photocoagulation in case of early PDR or in patients who are having very severe NPDR. Those who are having a poor compliance, they don't come back to you and you might expect the disease to progress to a stage of PDR and then it might go into tractional retinal detachment. So in those cases, you can also plan for a giving some amount of photocoagulation. If it is associated with systemic diseases, when you all know when diabetes is associated with nephropathy, then the progression of diabetic retinopathy will be much at a faster rate. So in such cases also you can go ahead with proliferative with photocoagulation. In cases of pregnancy also, the PDR changes as progresses faster, so you can go ahead with photocoagulation. Now you can see we use argon green laser in the wavelength of 514. This is a normal, most commonly used laser. Green laser, we call it argon green, range of 514 nanometer wavelength. So what we are doing here is you are giving multiple shots in the retina. When you are giving multiple shots, this is the normal color of the retina, which should be pinkish red. So when you are giving shots, there will be some amount of blanching. You just have to produce a blanching. Your laser energy shouldn't be more than, which produces more effect than blanching. It shouldn't cause necrosis there. So mild white blanching wherever you're seeing. So such spots have to be delivered to the patient. You're seeing a large area is being covered by retinal laser. This is usually done in 3 sittings. It is not done in a single sitting. And between any laser spots, there should be some area of laser-free zone should be there. So this is how photocoagulation appears when you're doing it when you're actually doing it. But after over a period of time, these spots, they progress with some amount of scarring and pigmentation. So when the patient comes back to you after a year or two, if you're seeing such marks with scars and pigmentation, this indicates that the patient had previous lasers. Here also you can see the patient has multiple new vessels which are growing. These new vessels, what will happen is over a period of time, they develop fibrosis along with them. So this fibrovascular membranes will progress into the vitreous cavity. They'll come into the vitreous cavity, causing pulling of the retina towards the vitreous cavity. This type of detachment is called as tractional retinal detachment. When the traction is being applied on the retina, because of excessive force, the retinal layers might develop few holes. So whenever there is a hole in the retina, then you call it as regma. So this type of pathology can also lead to a regmatogenous detachment. So initially a tractional detachment, later on going ahead with regmatogenous retinal detachment. This is the series of steps that happens in a case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. That is why we are so worried to diagnose early the cases of diabetic retinopathy. So all diabetic retinopathy individuals have to go for a regular screening at least once in a year, and depending on their diabetic levels, probably even 6 months, the patient has to be under the follow-up. So these changes, when we see in the patient of new vessels, then we go ahead and do a laser. Laser is of this type. Now, the laser treatment depends on for what you're doing the laser treatment. It's not pan-retinal laser treatment for all the conditions. Now, diabetic retinopathy can cause two things. One is it can cause macular edema. One is it can cause the new vessels. When you are seeing new vessels everywhere, then you go ahead and do a pan-retinal treatment. But when you're seeing a macular edema, you have to look for the focus. Is the edema coming from a leakage from a single vessel? Then you have to apply focal laser on that particular vessel. Or if you're seeing that overall there is a diffuse edema in the macular area, then you call it something called as grid treatment is given. The laser is applied in the shape of a grid. Usually this area that is between the disc and macula called as papillomacular bundle, this is spared. Only a C-shaped laser is done here. So here we do we always do the retinal laser in 3 sittings, because one is it causes pain to the patient and it takes time. So sudden ischemia of so much amount of retinal layer will cause a lot of pain to the patient and decrease in vision. So we follow it in at least 3 sessions, 1 week apart. First session we'll do one side of the eye, the nasal side or the inferior retina, and in the second session we'll go for the temporal part of the retina, and third session we might go for superior retina. It's the preference, but overall we cover the retina in 3 sittings, so it is done in different settings. Now, as we have discussed, that was about neovascularization and panretinal photocoagulation. In diabetic maculopathy, there is a specific term called as clinically significant macular edema, wherein amount of edema in the macular region is high, associated with hard exudates or without hard exudates. There is a definition for CSME. Please look up for that in your books and read that. Sometimes the definition of CSME will be asked. Now, as you have seen, depending on the area of leakage. So first you do a FFA. FFA is fundus fluorescein angiography. When you inject the fluorescein dye and follow it up with an angiography, you will be able to locate where all there is leakage. From where is that fluid in the macular area coming? So if the fluid is coming from a few vessels, then you can apply laser to those vessels and you call it as focal treatment. But if it is diffuse, then apply the laser in a complete C pattern called as grid photocoagulation. So all areas of macular thickening, they must be treated. FFA is mandatory to look for the points of leakage. If you find that the leakage is in a focal area, there is a focal cause of leakage, then go ahead and do a focal laser photocoagulation. If the leakage is diffuse, then go ahead with the grid photocoagulation. So laser delivery system, as you all know, it could be through a slit lamp or laser indirect ophthalmoscopy. So look at the focal lasers here. Focal laser is given, direct laser is given to the microaneurysm, and it should not be at the center of the fovea. You should always be at least 500 microns away from the center of fovea, because this is the part which is responsible for the best vision. So you don't want to spoil the cones and the clarity of vision of the patient. So it should be done at least 500 microns away from the center of the fovea. Power is titrated according to when you see a small white area on giving the laser. So in case of grid laser, you are seeing here, the laser is given around the macula in between the vascular arcade. Vascular arcade is this, between the superior and the inferior vessel in a C-shaped pattern. You should not be touching this area between the disc and macula, because we have again papillomacular bundle here. That is the vessels from the macular area going to the optic nerve. They in this area are called as papillomacular bundle. If that gets damaged, then the patient clarity of vision will be lost. So that is not done. So you do a laser only in a C-shaped or a reverse C-shaped manner in according to the eye which you are doing. So this is grid laser. Now, other indications of laser, till now we have seen neovascularization, that is proliferative diabetic retinopathy, or you can see macular edema. Macular edema can have any cause. It can be because of diabetic retinopathy, or it can be because of any vein occlusions, or it can be an inflammatory macular edema. So you have to look at the macular edema, and if there are large areas wherein the perfusion is lost, which could lead to development of new vessels, or you're seeing new vascularization within the retina, or in case of retinal vein occlusion, there is a tendency to develop new vascularization in the anterior segment. That is, the patient will have new vascularization of the iris, new vascularization in the angles. So if you are seeing any new vessels in the anterior segment in a case of retinal vein occlusion, then we go ahead and do a PRP. PRP is pan-retinal photocoagulation. But the grid laser and all are not done, especially if there is a macular ischemia, we'll leave it alone. Now, this is a case of central retinal vein occlusion. You are seeing all the 4 branches are of the vein which are formed from the temporal and the nasal, superiotemporal, inferotemporal, superior-nasal and inferonasal. All these veins are dilated and tortuous with multiple hemorrhages occupying the entire posterior pole of the retina. So if this kind of picture is there, then this is a picture of central retinal vein occlusion, or also called as venous stasis. There is a lot of blood filled in the veins, causing small amount of damages and multiple hemorrhages along the veins. So in this type of picture, when the patient is developing a macular edema, or when the patient is developing new vessels at a later stage, then you have to go ahead and do a laser photocoagulation. So this is one of the indications. Now, if it is a macular edema, then you do a grid laser. But if there is a branch retinal vein occlusion, only one area. Branch retinal means either the superior temporal retinal vein will be occluded, or the inferotemporal retinal vein is occluded. So only in that area you do a laser, then you call it a sectoral laser. So it is called as sectoral photocoagulation if the neovascularization is confined to one particular sector of the eye. Now, so all this was about photocoagulation. Now we move on to photodisruption. So as you've seen, photodisruption is because of the effect of the molecules which are being disturbed by the laser light. They form a multiple acoustic waves. So this acoustic wave will cause sudden disruption in the membranes. So the membranes could be like in case of Nd:YAG laser, the membrane that we disrupt is the posterior capsule, or if there are membranes which are inflammatory membranes which are occupying the pupillary area and forming thick synechiae, then that can also be disrupted. So we'll just see YAG laser and femtosecond laser in photodisruption. So YAG laser uses are, if you remember the word YAG, then you first thing that comes to you is YAG capsulotomy or YAG iridotomy. So these are the things that are used. YAG laser is used for capsulotomy or iridotomy. So capsulotomy is done for posterior capsular opacification. Membranectomy, when pupillary area is surrounded by thick membranes, then you go for membranectomy. Sometimes the vitreous will be extending into the pupillary area as vitreous bands. These vitreous bands, if there is a PC rent, they'll come into the anterior segment, and from there it can go even up to the surgical wound where you're creating in the limbus. So if the vitreous is extending so long, then it will cause pulling of the retina, that is called as traction. So at that particular juncture, if you're seeing any vitreous strand, you can cause lysis of the vitreous strands by the Nd:YAG laser. Now look at the YAG laser. Now this is a posterior capsular opacity. So the laser beam is focused onto the posterior capsule, and this layer is disrupted. This is an Elschnick's pearl pattern of posterior capsular opacification. This is a PCO or after cataract. Don't make any sound, just listen to it quietly. So this is a posterior capsular opacity. Elschnick's pattern is seen. Because of this much of opacity, the patient will not be able to see postoperatively. So what you have to do is disrupt the center of the, so that you are able to, the patient is able to see through the visual area. So initially, a small capsulotomy is done. Depending on how much is his optical area, the capsulotomy is extended. We'll move on to the next line. Now we'll look at the lasers of uses of femtosecond laser. So this is also used for photo disruption, the femtosecond laser. Basically, femtosecond laser is used for making sections in the membranes. Like in case of LASIK, a corneal flap can be created. In case of myopia, a small incision, like you have a surgery called as small incision lenticle extraction. There also small flaps are created to remove a lenticule from the eye. Arcuate incisions in the cornea are given for astigmatism using the femtosecond laser. Nowadays, the recent advances with the femtosecond laser is this assisted cataract surgery is done. This you call it as femtolaser assisted cataract surgery, that is FLACS. With the help of femtolaser, instead of giving the incisions manually, the incisions are done by femtolaser. Instead of doing a capsulorhexis manually, a femtosecond laser will help you to do a capsulorhexis depending on the size that you make. Now here you're seeing a femtolaser is done in a corneal surgery wherein a small lenticule is being extracted from within the eye. This is a SMILE surgery. Initially the cornea is exposed to create a small lenticule within the corneal stromal layers, and through a small incision which is made with a femtolaser, the lenticule is being extracted. So this is SMILE, which is done by using a femtolaser. Now this is a femtolaser assisted cataract surgery. Herein you focus onto the nucleus and then divide the energy to be focused onto the nucleus to create cuts in the nucleus. Basically, what now progressing as the surgery is progressing, instead of removing the nucleus as a whole, we are cutting it into different parts and removing. So to make it easier to cut the nucleus into different parts, first we expose the patient to the femtosecond laser. Apart from giving the incisions with the help of femtosecond laser, we also subject the capsulorhexis with the laser and then divide or do the nucleotomy with the femtosecond laser. So this is the advancement of femtolaser, that is femtolaser assisted cataract surgery. Now, if you look at the concept of photoablation, basically photoablation will interfere with the molecules of the tissues and will break any bonds which are present between the layers of the tissues. So this concept is utilized in case of LASIK especially or PRK also, wherein a flap, here you're seeing is, after creating a flap, the corneal tissue is exposed to the excimer laser, which will disrupt the bonds and will produce thinning in the corneal stroma. Here, in the procedure, first a corneal flap is created. This corneal flap is lifted or everted, and the central stroma is exposed to the corneal exposed to the excimer laser, causing photoablation. Photoablation will cause shrinkage of the corneal stroma, and depending on the refractive error of the patient, a calculation is done as to how much area has to be exposed. So this is a photorefractive keratectomy, LASIK, and sometimes patients are having corneal lesions in the center, like in case of band-shaped keratopathy. That lesion, if you're removing with the excimer laser, then you call it as phototherapeutic keratectomy. So these are the multiple uses of laser. Now, as advancements continue, the uses of lasers are also increasing. We have a procedure called as transpupillary thermotherapy. Here, in case of intraocular tumors, with the help of the tumor size is controlled with the help of thermal energy. The laser in the form of photocoagulation is applied to that particular tumor so that there is a shrinkage in the size of the tumor, wherein you can complete the treatment effectively by small excisions or by chemotherapy. So initial reduction of the size of the tumor is done by thermotherapy. This is applied in case of retinoblastoma or choroidal melanoma. This is done. Sometimes you do a transscleral diode laser photocoagulation. So through the sclera itself, you're introducing the diode laser, and then the probe is introduced and amount of laser is applied to the tumor, which is, if it is anteriorly, then this type of method is used. If the tumor is anteriorly, means anterior to the equator, that is, it is more in an accessible region. If it is in the posterior region, then you have to go for a transpupillary thermotherapy. The rays will go through the pupil and reach the posterior pole. If the lesions are anteriorly, then you can do a transscleral procedure. Choroidal melanoma is the most common primary malignant indication wherein these therapies are used. Now, after having discussed about the lasers, I would like to add a note about cryotherapy. Cryo is a different mechanism altogether. Cryo means decreasing the temperature. There in lasers, you could either increase or cause coagulation or ablation or disruption. But in case of cryotherapy, tissue injury is basically produced by application of intense cold. So the tissue is subjected to temperatures of minus 40 to minus 100 degrees. So how it acts is, the modes of action are basically, one is by necrosis of the tissues. Due to exposure to extreme cold temperature, the tissue gets necrosed. There can also be tissue adhesions. Like when we want to create tissue adhesions, like in case of retinal detachment, after you have removed the fluid, you want the retinal pigment epithelium and the neurosensory retina attached to each other. So you create a tissue adhesion by applying the cryotherapy. So this procedure is used even in retinal detachment. So this is called as cryotherapy. Another mode of action of cryotherapy is by causing vascular occlusion, like in cases of Eales disease or in cases of wherein there is exudative retinal detachment, like in Coats disease. A lot of vascular leakage is the cause of exudative retinal detachment. So there you can subject a particular blood vessel to the cryotherapy so that it causes occlusion of the blood vessels, so to prevent any leakage and further exudation. So this is the instrument of cryo. Here it causes, wherever you are applying, it freezes the tissue over there up to a temperature of minus 80 degrees. You have to hold it there till an ice ball is formed. Once an ice ball is formed, this is slowly released. So this is how cryotherapy is done. There are multiple uses of cryotherapy. We'll just see a few. In the lids, the cryotherapy can be done for trichiasis. That is, at the root of the eyelashes, you apply the cryo and do epilation. Whichever eyelashes has interned at the root of the eyelash, apply cryo and slowly epilate it. In case of lid tumors, also cryotherapy can be used. Multiple molluscum contagiosum, with the help of cryo, you can easily remove them. In case of conjunctival lesions, like if you're seeing very big papillae in case of VKC, which are interfering and causing secondary keratoconus, then cryo application to the hypertrophied papillae or the Jane papillae can be done. In case of ocular surface squamous neoplasia, if there is a neoplasm in the conjunctiva that you suspect, after excision is done, it is better to apply cryo to the base of the OSSN so that it prevents recurrence. It prevents the development of a neoplasia again. So this is another use. In chronic cases of herpes simplex keratitis, the use of cryo is advised. We have not used it though. Previously, in lens extraction, when it was done by ICCE, when the lens was removed as a whole, so you had to break the zonules and release the entire lens and remove it from the eye. So the cryo was applied to the lens. So the lens would get stuck to the cryo probe because of freezing, and then with gentle movement, it caused breakage of all the zonules, and slowly the lens was removed in toto. So that was done in the previous methods of ICCE. So ciliary body conditions, wherein if you are seeing a patient with an absolute glaucoma and a painful blind eye, this is an absolute indication. The patient has to go for cyclocryopexy, wherein you apply the cryo probe to the ciliary body till it undergoes necrosis. So that the patient doesn't produce more of aqueous humor, and the painful blind eye condition is gone. It is applied mainly for painful blind eye or absolute glaucoma. In retina, as we have discussed, if there are holes in case of retinal detachment, once the drainage of the SRF subretinal fluid is done, you have to bring in the hole closer so that the area around the hole gets sealed to the underlying layers. So for that particular purpose, you use cryopexy. And even in case of intraocular tumors, cryopexy is done. So today, we'll stop the class here.